We begin today very exciting with a new book, Sefer Melachim, the book of Kings. And it begins with David, of course, still on the throne. Va'melech David zakein ba'bayamim. Vayachsuhu bivgadim velo yicham lo. And King David had become old. He was of many days. And they tried to warm him by giving him clothing, but he would not warm. Vayomru lo avadav, yivakshu la'adoni hamelech na'ara betula, v'yamda lifnei hamelech, uti lo sochenet, v'shachva b'cheikecha v'cham la'adoni hamelech. And they say, let's have a Miss Israel pageant, and we'll find a nice young woman to go and to be next to the king and lie with him and warm him up. They search for a beautiful woman throughout Israel. Et Avishag Hashunamit vayavo oto ota lamelech. And they found this woman, Avishag, the Shunamit, and she was brought to the king to take care of him and keep him warm. Vanara yafa ad ma'od. The woman was very beautiful. And she was beautiful. She became the king's attendant. She waited upon him, but the king was not intimate with her. And there are those who like to finish the verse. He was not intimate with her, but part of what she had to do was be intimate with him. But that you can look in the commentaries. And now we have a second issue. So that's what's happening to David. He's in the palace. And meanwhile, he's old. And who's going to become the next king? So we have Adoniyahu, one of his sons, oldest son, who says, Ani amloch, I will reign. And he made chariots and horses, and he had a retinue, an entourage of 50 men, very similar to what Avshalom did a couple of chapters ago. And David never said to him, why are you doing that? And he was very good looking, and he was the next oldest after Absalom, after Avshalom. So we see all the similarities here. Obviously, it's being demonstrated. And in fact, two very important people, Evyatar the Kohen, and even more significantly, the general of the army. Well, maybe he's been removed from being general, but he's still the man in charge of the army. Yoav ben Sruya are following Adoniyahu. They think he should be the next king. But there's a whole list. The other Kohen, Tzadok and Vinayahu, we mentioned as the head of the Kreti, of the Pleti, the slingers of the arrows, and the prophet Natan and Shimi and others, warriors, did not think Adoniyahu should be king. So he goes to Ein Rogel, and he's offering sacrifices, and he invites the king's sons and all the princes and the officers, different people from the palace to be with him. But he doesn't call Nathan, and he doesn't call Vinayahu, and he doesn't call other great warriors. And here we finally mention somebody. And Shlomo, there's one brother he doesn't call, his brother Shlomo. So we haven't known until this point, although we sort of know, that there's nothing special about this kid Shlomo. But clearly from Adoniah not inviting Shlomo, it's demonstrating that Shlomo is his contender for the throne. Okay? And one thing, I like to read this chapter. David is old. I always like to think of this chapter as maybe Adoniyahu and Yoav and Evyatar, the people who are with him, that they're sequestering David on purpose. They may know that David wants Shlomo to be king, but they don't think it's right. So if we sequester the king, if we hide him, if we tell everybody he's old and he's sick, which he is old and sick, but we'll see, he's not that old and that sick that needs to be hidden away. So I always like to think that this is a little bit of a conspiracy chapter by Adoniyahu and his people to hide David so that they can assert the throne. And continue in verse 11. Natan went to Bathsheba and he said, you heard that Adoniyahu has made himself assume the kingship, and our father and our Lord David, right? He's still the king, doesn't know. So now please listen to my advice so that you can save your life and the life of your son Solomon. Sounds a little bit like we just had Purim, right? Megillat Esther, Mordechai telling Esther, you got to do something. There was to save the Jewish people. Here's to save you and your son. Go and say to the king, O Lord King, you swore to your servant, to me, your wife Bathsheba, that our son Shlomo would be the king. And yet Adoniah is the one who's king. And it's interesting here to think about, is this true? It seems that it's true. It seems there's something special about Shlomo because Adoniah didn't invite him. But we don't see anywhere before this that Shlomo was named as the successor. We're up to verse 14. You start to talk to the king, and then I'm going to come in, and I'm going to be the closer. I'm going to be the finisher. And Bathsheba came to the king, and the king now is very old. And Avishag, of course, is there taking care of the king. And here's something really important. When we learned the story of Bathsheba, she said 2 words. I'm pregnant. That's all she said in that story. David brought her to the palace. David slept with her, whether there was consent or not. David had her husband killed. She doesn't say anything. And here we see a transformation of a character from being, you could say in many ways, a victim to being an active participant. Vatikod, we're in verse 16, Bathsheba, Vatishtachu lamelech, vayomer hamelech malach. And Bathsheba bowed down, and the king says, what's the matter? Vatomer lo, Adoni ata nishbata b'Adonai Elohecha la'amotecha ki Shlomo b'nech yimloch. You swore by God that Shlomo would fulfill the throne. Our son, but Adoniah has proclaimed himself king. He's offering sacrifices, and he has people with him, but he didn't call your servant Shlomo. O king, everybody's looking to you to name your successor. And when you are with your fathers, when you pass away, and if this happens that Adoniah is king, we will be seen as traitors. Here comes the closer. Natan Hanavi comes into the palace. In the last chapter, we had Gad Hanavi, but mostly the conversations we see very often, Natan is the main prophet with King David. So the king is told, Nathan is here, and Nathan bows down. And Natan said, you must have said that Adoniah is going to succeed you. You must have said this because they're having a coronation ceremony. They're eating and they're drinking and they're saying, long live King Adoniah. So, but they didn't invite me or Tzadok, they didn't invite Shlomo. And was this your decision without telling us who would be your successor? It seems a little strange. And this is why, again, I like to think that maybe Adoniah and his people, they sequestered David, they hid David, they knew what David wanted to do, but Yoav, who always protects the throne, doesn't think that's the best idea. And Adoniah clearly wants to be king. And so maybe that's what they're doing. But here we have Bathsheba and Natan coming in. And we continue in verse 28. So David says, call Bathsheba to me. It doesn't seem we ever saw her leave, but maybe she left before, or maybe she's in the room, but she's further away, and David's old, and he wants her to come close. And the king said, I swear by the living God who has rescued me from every trouble. Says, as I swore by God, Shlomo will sit on throne this very day. Vatikod Bathsheba apayim arts, and Bathsheba again bows down. Vatishtachu lamelech, to the king. Vatomer yichi Adonai Melech David liolam. Right? Hold your horses, Adoniyahu, and your friends. It's still David is still king. Vayomer hamelech David karuli l'tado hakleinu latana aviu levayo v'nyoda vayavo lifnei hamelech. So he calls for the people who Adoniah didn't go with. Vayomer hamelech lem kuchu imachem et avdei Adonaichem v'yirkavtem Shlomo b'ni ala pirda asher li v'horadetem oto el gichon. And he said, take my soldiers, my loyal soldiers, and have Shlomo ride on my mule. I think of the Mashiach, the ideas of Mashiach, there's a chamor, it's a little different, it's a donkey, it's not a mule, but right, kingship, he's riding on a mule. and bring him down to the spring of Gihon. Shlomo. And Tzadok and Natan, you should go with him and then blow the horn and say, blow the shofar and say, long live King Solomon. V'alita macharav uva v'yashav al kisi v'hu yimloch tachtai. V'otot tziviti leoti nagid al Yisrael v'al Yehuda. And march after him and let him come to my throne because I designate him as ruler of Israel and Judah. Vayan v'nayo v'nyodat hamelech v'yomer amen kein yomar Adonai Elohei Adoni hamelech. Kasher ya Adonai Adoni hamelech kein yiyem Shlomo vayagdel et kiso mikisei Adoni hamelech David. And V'nayo says, yes, sir. And God should be with your son as he was with you, and his throne should even be greater than yours. So they do as David said, and they're bringing him to the spring, to Gihon. We didn't see this detail, but we know that always in the past, the two kings, Shaul and David, they were anointed with oil. That's the way they were anointed, and that's what goes on here. They anoint Shlomo. And they blast the shofar, and all the people who are there with him say, long live King Solomon. And it's a joyous day. They're singing, they're dancing, and the noise can be heard all over. And Adonio and his people hear. As they were finishing to eat. Vayishma Yoav et kol hashofar vayomer madua kol hakirya homa. And Yoav hears the shofar. He says, "What's that uproar? What's going crazy?" Odenu midaber. And while they're still talking, trying to figure it out, Vine Yonatan ben Aviatar kohen ba vayomer Adonio bo ki ish chayil ata v'tov tivaser. And we had this before with Eviatar and different people who show up. And here, Yonatan, the son of Eviatar, shows up, and Adonio says, "Oh, he's a great man, so he must bring great news." Vayan Yonatan vayomer la Adonio. Aval Adonenu Melech David Himlichet Shlomo. News is not so good. Our master, our King David, has anointed, has coronated Shlomo as king. And tells them what they did. They anointed him, and that's the noise, is the joy and the happiness. And now 46. And Shlomo is already sitting on the throne. We don't know if this is literal or this is figurative, but either way it means the same thing. Shlomo has already assumed the kingship. Yetev Elohim et Shem Shlomo mishmecha v'yigdel et kiso mikisecha v'yishtachu hamelech al hamishkav. And the king's servants have come and they've said that Shlomo's kingdom should even be greater than David's kingdom. And the king is sitting there low on his couch. He's accepted. This is what he's doing. Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael, asher natan hayom yoshev al kisi ve'enei ra'ot. And what did the king say? Blessed be God, praise be God, who this day has provided a successor to my throne while I can still see it. And all the people who went with Adoniyahu, they went their separate ways. They realized this was no longer the party to be at. This is no longer the person to support. And Adoniyahu was scared, and so he ran, and he's holding on to the horns, onto the corners of the altar, right? I'm next to the Mizbeach, sanctuary, right? And word gets to Shlomo that Shlomo is told that Adoniyahu is holding on to the Mizbeach, he's looking for sanctuary, for protection, and he wants Shlomo to swear that he will not kill Adoniyahu for what Adoniyahu did. And just interestingly, back in Parshat Mishpatim, in Sefer Dvarim, when it talks about somebody who's chayav mita, it says there, somebody who's supposed to get the death penalty, it says, Me'im mizbachi tikachenu lamot. Even if he's on the Mizbeach, he's going for sanctuary, it doesn't work that way. The place you go for sanctuary in Israel is, of course, the Ir Miklat, but that's only for an inadvertent sin. Vayomer Shlomo im yeh leben chayil lo yipol me'sarato arza v'imra timsa vo v'met. And Shlomo says, if he's obedient, not even one hair will fall off his head. Shlomo's cured balding. He's very smart, right? We're told, and this is the first part. But if he doesn't listen, he shall die. Vayishlach HaMelech Shlomo, vayoridu me'al mizbeach, vayavo yishtachlu me'al Shlomo, vayomer lo, Shlomo lech leveitecha. And so he comes to the king, comes in front, and Shlomo says, okay, thank you for coming, paying homage, showing that I'm the person in charge, and now it's time for you to go home. That is to say, you go do your own thing, you stay in your house, you're a wealthy guy, you're the son of the king, but don't try to get involved in communal affairs, because I have been named the next king of Israel.